NSFW Redditors who have gone to the emergency room due to a sexual accident. What was your injury and story? After doing the deed I had a massive headache that was like a bomb going off in my head. Wife rushes me to the ER thinking I have busted a brain vessel and having a stroke. Basically says it happens a lot. Just kept me for observation and let me go when I could see straight again. Has never happened again. I'm uncircumcised and I tore my frenulum having sex with a girl one time. It's the little flap of skin that attaches the bottom of the foreskin to the bottom of the head of the penis. Just like the little flap of skin between your lips and gums. The worst part of it was that I didn't notice during sex. I pulled out to cum on her stomach and a torrent of blood and cum spurted everywhere. I looked down and saw it and just awkwardly said problem. First we thought that she had gotten her period. Which was sorta mortifying for both of us. But after a quick inspection. I realized that I was squirting blood out of my dick. I don't know if any of the rest of you have ever squirted blood out of your dicks, but turns out that we've got millions of years of evolution telling us to protect that little fucker at all costs. So I was freaking the fuck out. Turns out the doctors can't do anything about it. I put Vaseline on it and waited weeks for it to heal up. It never did, fully. Now it's significantly tighter, weaker than it used to be. Now every time I have sex there's a part of my brain that's terrified that it'll happen again. Kinda sucks. Was fingering a girl and she started bleeding. First thought it was her period and was just embarrassing, so I stopped when I realized and said sorry. But she started freaking out. Said it was nowhere near her period and it was a lot of blood. So I got my buddy to drive us to the ER. I hardly knew her and just felt like I must have punched a hole in her or something terrible. But nope. The ER informed her it really was a period. He wasn't sure why it started so suddenly or why it was so strong compared to previous, but no, she wasn't dying from bleeding out. Just left me confused. Was the doctor. Not the patient. You know those erectile dysfunction treatments that used to be on billboards all over. Longer sex now. Etc. Well. As is often joked about. Those treatments advise you to go to hospital if it lasts longer than 4 hours. I came in, having used those treatments. Having had an erection for maybe 6 or 8 hours. His dick was purple, not purple helmeted warrior of love purple. But more holding your breath until you pass out purple. Also very painful for the guy. We called the urology registrar, Red Resident, to ask him to come and look. And for advice on what to do in the meantime. His answer? Take a large gauge needle on a big syringe. Stick it right into his glans penis and suck out as much blood as you can. Then my shift ended. I did not stick around to watch that one. Not a patient, but an doctor. I've seen several injuries, sexual misadventures. Common things. Sex toys, coke bottles, vegetables stuck up people's asses. As I tell everyone after I or the or get it out. I don't care what you stick up your ass. But use something with a flange at the base, e.g. Use a dildo with fake balls on the end. Not just a straight rod. It acts as a stopper and prevents it from getting sucked up and stuck up your butt. Less common things but not super rare. Priapisms. Almost always because some dude decided he wanted to have a really awesome night and took 3 or 4 Viagra. Now he has a boner that won't go down and I'm explaining what a dorsal penile block is to him. When he looks really uncomfortable at the idea of me putting a needle in his dick. I explain that this is just to numb it. So I can stick an even bigger needle in his dick to aspirate out blood. Point of reference. I numb you with a 25 grams. I aspirate with an 18 grams. Size chart for PPL who haven't seen them. More rare. Broken dicks. The post by E-Man below is fairly on point. Generally it's a guy on the bottom. Girl on top and he pops out for a second before she comes down hard and he jams into her perineum instead of her vagina or anus. Blood vessels rupture and the penis fills with blood and looks almost exactly like an eggplant. Once you've seen one. You know what happened. I don't fix those. Those go see urology and go to the operating room. Not fun. Other fun things. Cock rings that got stuck. Small toys stuck in the vagina, sounding misadventures, those go straight to urology. Google it if you don't know what it is. Implantable penis pump malfunctions, etc, etc, etc. There's more. But that covers the bread and butter of what I see in this category. Doug was my 4th year college roommate. Along with a couple of other people. He was a strange fellow. I became accustomed to broken beer bottles in the floor. Bizarre pornography in the VCR. PCs in places you wouldn't expect it. And frequent visits by the cops and to the emergency room. One night. Doug is being visited by his girlfriend from out of town. They spend most of their time tucked away in Doug's bedroom. Doing God knows what. Doug sneaks out and doesn't return for several hours. When he comes back. He has an emergency room bracelet on. After some grilling. He gives up the story. He and his girlfriend are looking for something that might work as a makeshift cock ring. Nothing around except a large padlock. So, she snaps the padlock around his cock and balls. When it becomes clear that it isn't going to work like they thought it would, they go looking for the key. Nowhere to be found. Most of us would have thought about the location of the key before putting it around our junk. So, Doug heads off to the emergency room to get it removed, afraid of losing his giblets to restriction of blood flow. The procedure takes several hours because the doctor has to parade in every other doctor, nurse, intern, and possibly janitor to check out the moron with the padlock stuck around his nuts. Also, they have to take frequent breaks during the sawing off due to the heat that keeps accumulating from the friction and burning his genitals. Was doing the deed. No thrills, nothing fancy. Afterwards we're sitting on the couch and I feel crampy. So I go into the bathroom. And I sit. That's when I have the most painful cramp of all time. My boyfriend comes in to see me, full-blown hysterical tears. Calls my mom, who's an ER nurse whose motto as a child was no bones sticking out or gushing blood. You're fine. She drives down immediately and takes me to the ER. That's when I panic. Because if this cold-hearted ER nurse thinks I need to go pronto, it's serious. When we get there it's low enough that I pretty much immediately see a doctor. Who just happens to be my mom's favorite coworker. Awesome. I then try to explain why it hurts and how it happened when my mom blurts out she was having sex. The doctor didn't flinch much. But I sure did. I wanted to die. Thankfully the embarrassment didn't last long because they gave me amazing painkillers. Long story short, I had sex. Had an ovarian cyst burst, horrifyingly painful. Went to be doctor and my mom were buddies. Good times. Not so much an injury, but the treatment and aftermath did hurt a lot. Condom came off inside me and we didn't notice until after we were done. Both of us tried to look or feel for it and couldn't find any trace. I ended up in the and the doctor tried removing it with tongs. But it was apparently wedged right up in my cervix and the tongs couldn't reach. So this doctor with hands like Mr. Burns had to lube me up and get in there with his hands to yank it out. It hurt so much and I was completely mortified as my partner was sat next to me watching and was horrified. I now have a phobia of that happening again and it makes sex with condoms really awkward for me. I had really terrible cramps a few times after sex. Enough that I had to take pain pills just to sleep. The pain was gone in the next morning both times. And weirdly it didn't happen every time we had sex. I went to the gyno and even had an ultrasound done. But no one could see anything. Fast forward a few months later. One night my boyfriend and I got kind of drunk while watching Baywatch, more like Baywatch, am right. Rock bottom and decided to keep a good night going with some tipsy sex. The cramping started midway through and didn't let up. Within minutes I was crouched naked on the toilet, no idea why I thought it would help, and couldn't move. My boyfriend called an Uber in lieu of an ambulance. I managed to get myself dressed despite puking every few seconds into a plastic mixing bowl. The poor driver didn't want to take me. Since he probably thought I was drunk. And sat there arguing with my boyfriend that I needed an ambulance. I blurted out, "Get me to a hospital now," and he slammed on the gas. That argumentative angel got me there in less than 5 minutes. It turns out an ovarian cyst had burst and tore my uterine wall, so I was bleeding internally. I had to have laparoscopic surgery to remove and cauterize the cyst. Those little bitches are no joke. My only regret is never learning what size fruiterball I could compare it to. I'm also eternally grateful to my boyfriend to being too tired for tent sex the week before, or I would have been bleeding internally at the far end of the Grand Canyon. Not the but I did end up at my gyno the next day after I got my clit sliced by someone's too long fingernail. PSA, please keep your nails clipped and filed. I had to drive a friend to the after he broke his dick during a house party. I was already the scheduled DD for my friends and apparently one of them snuck off with this girl. They were doing the good old reverse cowgirl like any other young bucks would and she ended up zigging where she should have zagged and kinda did a 90-degree body torque. To his explanation. It sorta just popped and he threw her off him and screamed bloody murder. He tossed on some shorts commando style and told me to drive him to the hospital like now. Drop what I'm doing. That in the car, you're the only one sober. Let's go. Let's go. Oh, and the girl came along. Her name was Amanda and she was pretty chill. So it was me driving two barely clothed 20-year-olds in my car to the local hospital 20 minutes away, with my dude holding his dick in the backseat and Amanda just consoling him, rubbing his back, making sure he's okay. Telling him, "It's going to be alright. You're gonna be fine." Like he hadn't just fractured his penis. So, we make it to the and he just hobbles in and says he broke his dick. Please fix it. And they took him in and I was just alone with this girl I had met that night, just waiting for the prognosis. And around an hour later they tell us that he's having emergency surgery because he suffered a severe penile fracture and tore his urethra as well. And basically told us to go home. Call someone to pick him up that night. Dude was under the knife and discharged the next day. Penis intact and pried only somewhat. Oh, and I also had to call his parents to let them know that their son was having emergency dick surgery and to pick him up in the morning. It could not be a fun call at 12 at night depending on the perspective. They ended up dating for a while after that too. A few years ago with an ex-boyfriend of mine. We were fooling around and he tried to pin my arms over my head on the bed and ended up banging my wrist really hard on the headboard. It immediately started to bruise and I was scared it was broken. We ended up in the and I was asked all kinds of questions like did I feel comfortable going home with him? Did he hurt me? Did he hurt my wrist? I wasn't expecting that. At all. They separated us at one point to ask me more questions about how I got hurt. Which was super embarrassing to try and explain. I'm pretty sure he was scared to be too rough with me after that. And I don't blame him. Nothing was broken, just our egos. Finally I can contribute. When I was 17 I was having sex with a gentleman who escaped vaginally and accidentally rammed my asshole with his dick, so I immediately flinch in pain. And then the blood starts. I'm bleeding all over. He is sobbing because this pussy ruined his life. We go to the hospital. They fix me. I have to call my mom because I'm a minor and she has my insurance information. I tell her on the phone what happened. She turns to my family, it's dinner time, and says we are going to the hospital because your sister is a whore. We bring it up every holiday we can. My wife had just had surgery to remove an ovarian cyst. So after a week of abstinence we were having sex. I felt like I hit something wrong, but she said to not worry about it. Fast forward a couple of hours. And she's in a lot of pain. She thinks there might have been a complication with the surgery and us having sex might have caused something bad. Off we go to the One ultrasound later, the intravaginal one with that huge wand. The doctor tells us that she had a bruise on the inside of her vagina. Essentially, I beat her pussy up. I remembered the moment. And I asked her about it. She said well, it did hurt. But I didn't want you to stop. Boy they. Shortened version. Was a teenager in high school. Making out with my then so who was my first sexual partner. She pushed me onto her bed and got on top of me and started grinding on my penis while we continued to make out without a care in the world. Basically what happened was that the fabric of my boxers got caught in a weird way up against the frenulum, a tissue connecting the shaft to the head, and the grinding basically caused a cut to be made and caused a lot of blood to begin spilling out. This was also before we had actual PIV sex, so we were both still virgins. To this day I have a cut down there. While having a day shift. We were called an older man was brought in with a big whiskey glass up in his arse. The doctor had to do a laparotomy. And removed his lower intestines. I've told this story a few times. The sex injury literally ended up saving my life. My best friend at the time and I had a few drinks and tensions had been there between us for a long time. She invited me back to her room and tackled me onto her bed. Where I hit my head hard off the bedpost. The next morning concussion symptoms started hitting me very heavily, so I went to the On my CT scan they told me everything looks normal except for your old brain trauma. I have never had brain trauma. About a month later it is diagnosed as a brain tumor that I was not showing symptoms for yet. Had surgery a few weeks later to have it removed and at that point found out it was non-cancerous. So basically she fucked my brains out. So I get a TXT from a guy I work with at 1 AM saying hey I won't be able to make it in tomorrow. Naturally I asked why. So he says I'm in the hospital. It's really embarrassing. I press and ask what happened and are you okay? Turns out he was having some hard sex with his girlfriend and went back a little too far. And when he went to go back and he missed the entrance to the cave and hit in between her cooter and thigh. Bending his dick in half. I didn't believe him at first, but after some research I found out that it is real. He ended up having to get emergency surgery and was out for 2 weeks. So yay, to sum it up, my coworker broke his cock. Oh boy. I was 19. My girlfriend and I were being experimental in the dark and we decided to try a 69. She was on top. All was great. Then she came. All was not great. She involuntarily bit down at the middle of my penis. It was only a momentary thing. But the damage was done. In the dark. The thought she'd made me cum. So she kept going. As she came she relaxed her legs and I was sort of unable to move. She mistook my squirming for enjoyment. After around 5 seconds trying to buckaroo her off me I threw her off to the side. The only way I can describe the pain is like a paper cut. On your penis. The other way I would describe it is that the penis has a massive artery. This means blood is pumping away from the heart. This also means it squirts. A lot. We switched on the light. Everywhere. It was like a murder scene. My penis was still semi-hard, just spurting blood everywhere. Her face looked like she was Hannibal Lecter's attractive daughter. The sheets were covered. There were little lines of spurt everywhere. I reckon I lost around a pint of blood just in the 30 seconds or so from the bite to me passing out. We were at her parents' house. I wake up in the ambulance, and I'm assured everything will be fine. I'm fully fitted up with a tourniquet and a guy is pressing down on my now flaccid penis. It doesn't hurt but it throbs. We get to the hospital. I get a transfusion. They sew some liquid nitrogen cauterization thing. Then they wrap me up with a willy warmer. We decide with her parents to never speak of it again. Now I have PTSD and every single blowjob takes me back to that moment. That pain. 1 bottle of Don Julio. 1 string of missing anal beads. 1 week of thinking they were lodged. 1 trip to her out of town. 1 fake name. 1 x-ray. No beads. Found them weeks later in my makeup drawer. Don Julio is the devil. Not me, but this literally happened to my roommate hours ago. She called me and told me I needed to drive her to the hospital because of an emergency. Which happened during sex hooking up with this guy she's seeing. Apparently he choked her out. She's pretty shy and seemingly conservative. And sounded really worried about it. And he's pretty weird, and according to her, overly attached and emotional. I thought maybe it wasn't consensual, 1, by the tone of her voice, and 2, recent mentions that she had to end things with him. She also said he was still around her. I silently concluded that he got carried away and went too far with her out of emotions. But no. Turns out they got super high and tried to make things hot and heavy. He tried to grab her neck and basically karate chopped her like a total goober. And her high-ass daughter esophagus was bleeding because she couldn't swallow. I assured her she didn't need to go to the hospital, but I ended up taking her anyway. She had to tell the hospital in California she got high and tried to have sex and her neck got judo choked. They took an x-ray of her neck and literally no damage whatsoever. When I picked her back up she was super embarrassed and begged me not to tell anyone. So now I decided to tell Reddit. TLDR. Roommate got choked during a feeble attempt at sex while high. Daughter throat broke. Then realized she was fine, but not before ratting herself out to the hospital like a total Barney. One time I was getting a handy from my girl and she decides she wants to use some lube. She goes and grabs what she thinks is Astroglide. Pumps a few shots into her hand. And gets back into the game. It feels absolutely amazing. But I noticed that it smelled a little more chemically than what it should have been. We finish things up and go to bed shortly after. In the morning I wake up to take a piss and feel a slight sting. Turns out the sting was one of many pieces of dried dick skin that were falling off. It seriously looked like lizard skin. What she had used the night before was not lube, but some industrial strength soap I had taken from one of the labs I worked in at Stanford Medical School. Chunks of skin continued to fall off for the next 2 days and I could barely touch it for a week because of how bad it stung. I didn't have to go to the but I certainly learned my lesson.